Did you guys know that Man vs. Machine has been broken for almost a year and Valve have neglected to do anything about the problem? Well, if you didn't know, it shouldn't come as a surprise. It seems like every year there's a new bug that tailspins the game mode until the potted plant starts waddling over to the GitHub page. 2025 has been no different. Of course, with the brand new MvM update on the horizon, I figured now's a good time to go over the problem in detail. That's right, if you've noticed your queue times have shot up to ridiculous levels over the past year, you're not hallucinating. Okay, maybe you are. MvM players aren't the most mentally sane people around, but for this issue, no, you're not crazy. It's easy to chalk this up to Man vs. Machine being an old game mode, and the dwindling player base is what's jacking up queue times to the stratosphere. A perfectly valid assumption, but it's wrong. I've looked at pretty much every forum discussion, every YouTube video, every GitHub post, every viewer testimonial about this issue, and no one, not one person, has been able to provide a definitive answer for why this is happening. Well, I have a few theories. So, what happened? What caused the wait times for MvM matches to shoot up precipitously? The vast majority of this video will be entirely new information that many of you have never heard before. However, it's a very long story. Get comfortable, we're gonna be here a while. To start off, we're gonna be looking at where the roots of the issue first began to take form. Scream Fortress 2024. We all remember that, right? That time where you could select every map in the game, crank your ping filter to the moon, queue alone or in a full party, and still end up waiting 15 minutes for a game? How could anyone forget? The influx of new content in tandem with the more constricted contract system overwhelmed casual mode's matchmaking system to the point of non-functionality. But what many people don't know is that this update was the catalyst for a series of changes that Valve made to their game coordinator, a mere week after Scream Fortress's release. On October 18th, 2024, Valve added 5 new server regions into their rotation: London, Warsaw, Vienna, Seoul, and Buenos Aires. All of this is borrowed infrastructure from Counter-Strike 2, so nothing too noteworthy here. However, contrary to popular belief, I'm actually not quite sure if this patch was intended to cure the ills that were plaguing Scream Fortress. Think about it, 160 maps in rotation, people only queuing a few at a time for contract farming, and Valve's grand plan was to spread the player base even thinner via increasing the amount of accessible server regions? That doesn't add up. The timing, however, is all too convenient. Years upon years pass without a single additional locale being added, but now, when everything's going to shit, suddenly it's time to throw in a couple more? Coincidence? My ass. This patch didn't resolve the issue, and Valve likely figured as much, but it was the first of many sequential dominoes to fall. Later that year, in December of 2024, Valve would add 3 new Indian servers. In March of this year, we got Dallas alongside their rollout in CS2. In June, we got Atlanta. In July, we got Helsinki, and in September, we got Falkenstein. I'd love to show all of you the patch notes, but Valve never addressed them there. Now, if this doesn't sound bad to you, that's because it isn't. Giving an increased percentage of the player base access to servers with low ping is a fantastic quality of life feature. We're nearly at parity with Counter-Strike at this point. However, those weren't the only changes made to TF2's modern matchmaking. Shortly after Valve added 5 new server locations in October, Valve would introduce 3 separate patch notes the following month. The first is just a vague, improved matchmaking statement. Not much to dig into here. The other 2 notes are where things start to get interesting. Improved matchmaking behavior for users with less than ideal ping levels. The matchmaker should now be quicker to put you in the best available region. And improved matchmaker decision making for cross-region parties. Let's tackle that first one because it's by far the most relevant factor relating to the largest sector of the player base. Without getting neck deep in the nuance, TF2's matchmaking prioritizes servers that are best suited to where you personally are located. It doesn't matter the time of day or the amount of active players in your region. The matchmaker will always try connecting you close to home unless you're only looking for hardwood at 2 AM. Aren't we all? The ratio of European servers to American ones can literally be 20 to 1, and you'll still get American servers if that's what the coordinator matchmaker deems as a proper fit, provided you've selected enough maps to not castrate server availability. I tested this myself. I woke up extremely early in the morning, 9 AM, set the matchmaker to auto, and selected the right half of the map list for every mainline game mode. I queued for a new match every 6 minutes over the course of a 2-hour time block, totaling at 20 different games. Before joining each server, I'd refresh teamwork.tf to get a feel for the distribution of Western players compared to the rest of the world. It bounced between 2 to 4%, increasing as the day went on. Of the 20 games tested, all 20 of them were American servers, 19 of which were East Coast, the closest proximity to me. All of this without a single queue attempt breaking the 1-minute wait barrier. No ping restrictions, no gerrymandering data. This is just the matchmaker doing it raw. Despite the fact that the player count outside of America was 20 to 30 times larger, not once did the matchmaker throw me across the Atlantic to find a game of Badwater. Think of matchmaking like a bubble attuned to your location with a limited radius of optimal latency. With lower degrees of connectivity preferences, the more outwards you move. Given the patch note definitively refers to less than ideal ping levels and the best available regions, it's clear that dropping a surplus of new locales wasn't enough to finish the job. Valve needed to actually modify their matchmaker to ensure players approximating those regions could be properly funneled towards them. For example, here's a map of the US with the 3 original server regions: Washington, California, and Virginia. If you lived somewhere in Middle America, you were kinda shit out of luck for worthwhile server options. But because these were technically the best ones available, that's where the game would put you the vast majority of the time. Cut to 2025, where Chicago and Dallas servers are now in the rotation, and as was proven in the October 2024 patch, the mere addition of new server regions does not guarantee appropriate traffic towards them. So what could they do? Tighten the matchmaker's preferences for what is considered optimal connectivity. That makes sense to me. We're definitely oversimplifying things a bit here, and keep in mind, this is all just a theory. But we know for a fact that Valve made these matchmaking changes to address suboptimal ping conditions right after a new batch of server regions were added to the rotation. And we also know for a fact that there have been adverse effects on another sector of the community. Something happened here. Look at Europe too. Before Scream Fortress 2024, there existed 3 European server regions: Frankfurt, Madrid, and Stockholm. Because of this, players in the UK or Eastern Europe had matchmaking that was tailored towards those servers being the best possible choices. But now that Valve have nearly tripled the amount of turf via 5 new server regions, it would make sense for the matchmaker to tighten up, funneling players adjacent to those regions into those servers more often. Again, I could totally be pissing in the wind here, but everyone, including those with way more insight into TF2's matchmaking than I, are still stumped for a definitive answer. No GitHub perusing or SDK digging will get you anywhere. No one knows what's going on. However, given the timing, the patch notes, the new server regions, and the very noticeable after effects that we'll get to later, I think it's fair to assume that something akin to this theory manifested in November of 2024. Now, have these changes been beneficial for casual mode? It seems like the answer is yes. There's been way more praise surrounding the preferential server connectivity than complaints surrounding length and queue times as a result of this change. A prior seasonal update was literally the catalyst for why Valve began updating their matchmaker to begin with. The non-functionality of player queues during high periods of uptime can hardly be attributed to this. All things considered, these changes appear to be a warmly welcomed quality of life feature for the average player experience. Man vs. Machine, on the other hand, has now become fucking unplayable. Sometimes. Okay, let me explain. Everyone knows that MVM's total player pool is much lower than that of casual mode or community servers, only averaging a few hundred concurrent players during peak hours. Most TF2 fans don't play the game mode at all, and most of the ones who do aren't poop-socking it 18 hours a day. It's a side gig for the majority of the player base, and always has been. But not only does MVM suffer from a shallower player pool, it also suffers from a progression system that is innately cannibalizing. For man-up mode, players players are only allowed to queue for one tour at a time, and within that tour, the vast majority of players are only queuing for the missions they need to get the loot boxes at the end. There's also the Join Game in Progress button, an elevated queue priority option that segments the available player base even more. The matchmaker takes an already constrained player pool and breaks it down into smaller and smaller chunks. This, on its own, was enough to already cause issues. Now, get ready for the fun part. You may have noticed that there was one typically omnipresent matchmaking condition that I neglected to mention. Ping. This is because the ping limiter, often used for casual mode, has been notoriously defunct for man vs. machine. When Meet Your Match came out, this appeared to be an unintentional bug, and patch notes supposedly rectifying the issue were brought out. But eventually, at some point down the road, the functionality of the ping limiter broke once again, and Valve never bothered to issue another fix. That doesn't mean the matchmaker didn't maintain the traditional regional preferences. It absolutely did. Degenerate high tours in particular would often use VPNs to target particular servers to increase the odds that they'd get placed into specific ongoing games. If you've ever been the victim of a last wave vote kick, good chance they had a friend 8 time zones away loading up Surfshark to cut the line and steal your loot. However, there was no way to directly and permanently filter out servers that had triple-digit ping counts. Whether or not you plop into them was entirely down to the will of the game coordinator. But apparently, during the November 2024 matchmaking patch, unbeknownst to literally the entire fucking player base, the ping limiter's functionality got reinstated to man vs. machine. What the fuck? That's a crazy thing to re-implement without a patch note telling anybody. Like, show of hands, even a whole ass year later, who knew that this happened? Because I sure as shit didn't. I genuinely thought this was an unconfirmed rumor until a couple of months ago, where I decided to test it myself. Queuing for a full Mecha Engine tour with my ping tolerance only allowing for American East Coast servers. This happened around 10 a.m. Eastern Time, nearly peak hours for the Eurobros, and it took me 87 minutes to find a game. And where did my Ontario leaflet ass end up? Chicago. Yep. Something tells me it's working now. Just to be clear, the problem isn't that Valve brought back the ping filter for man vs. machine. It should absolutely be there. Players should be allowed to opt out of being placed into high ping lobbies, regardless of how much their queue time spikes because of it. The actual problem is that this change was re-implemented without a peep on Valve's behalf. That's just fucking stupid. This has been a non-factor relating to MVM queue times for quite literally years, and now suddenly, out of nowhere, without even a passing mention, the ping filter is fully operational. Well, no shit people's queue times are gonna be higher. MVM players are bottlenecking their own connectivity without even knowing it. There's also the issue of the ping filter being tied to a menu that many new players have zero clue how to adjust. A long outdated UI flub that'll hopefully one day be fixed. My advice, put a button right next to the mission menu that brings up the ping slider whenever needed. Simple, clean, in your face, and easily adjustable. Add that by the MVM update, and all's well that ends well. Okay, that's easy. Just adjust your ping settings whenever queuing for a late night mission, and you're good to go, right? Well, if that were the case, this video would only be 4 minutes long, and we're way past that point by now. See, a lot of MVM players have straight up quit the game due to the November patch. Even now, players are still claiming that the ping filter is unresponsive. Exhibit A.
Why doesn't this fucking setting work? Do you know how easy this would be if I wanted any server and set my acceptable ping levels super high and it just threw me into any server? That would be fucking great. And the people who only wanted nice low ping will be able to set it so that they can only get into those lobbies. So why the fuck do I now have to wait like 20 times longer than I used to for the same fucking lobbies? Oh, you may be thinking, oh, this is just a you problem. Oh yeah? Then why do all of the other people who I ask basically immediately know this issue? People I party with, people who I randomly run into, people who stopped playing because of the queue times? Fuck. I can only do so many things before I get bored of sitting in the same fucking queue for 3 hours.
Wrong answer aside, I can completely understand why so many people have come to this conclusion. When you're so desperate for a lobby that you're literally telling the matchmaker you will take a server from fucking India if you have to, and you're still not getting connected anywhere, it's easy to assume that the ping filter is the same load of junk it's always been. It's also fair to assume that a change of this magnitude would come with an accompanying patch note. No such thing was done. The ping filter at the very least guarantees you won't be region locked upon joining a lobby, but even players who lift that restriction in coordinated fashion are seeing unbearable queue times. What's the problem? It could be that a percentage of the player base are self-isolating via self-imposed connectivity restrictions that are entirely invisible to them, or it could be something else. This would be the logical outcome of a matchmaking change like this. Faraway servers that used to be considered suboptimal but fine are now considered horrible options, and the game coordinator waits as long as possible to make sure you're not thrown into one of those servers before eventually giving up and putting you there anyways half the time. The matchmaker is so strict, so intent on preventing you from connecting to a server with bad ping, you're stuck waiting way longer than you used to prior to the November patch. I don't know if I'm wearing a tinfoil hat or not, but tell me the dots aren't lining up here. At the very least, we can bypass these problems by grabbing a group of friends and six-stacking it party style. Actually, no, you can't. Think we forgot about that? We didn't. Prior to the November 2024 patch, you would always, I repeat, always get a near instant queue pop whenever you had a fully pre-made group, no matter the region. But now, apparently, if you have even one guy in your party who's from a faraway region, you straight up cannot connect to any available servers. You have to actively quarantine yourself from playing with Australians if you actually want to find a game. The patch that claimed to fix cross-regional partying completely destroyed cross-regional partying. Ping settings are irrelevant, you're not finding a game. I'm sorry, but this is why I absolutely refuse to believe that these recent queuing issues are entirely a result of newly imposed ping filters and nothing else. I just don't buy it. MvM players are doing everything possible to make them a non-factor, as negligible as they can be. And despite that, queue times are still fucked for a massive portion of the player base. Valve did something to decrease the flexibility of their matchmaker. And for all the things they left out of the patch notes, at the very least they gave us a lead on that. I should stress that if you live in America or Europe, only play 2 cities, only play during peak hours, and only decide to solo queue, your experience has likely remained unaffected by this patch. The player pool is large enough under those conditions for these queue issues to not manifest the vast majority of the time. So if that's the bulk of your grind sesh, you're probably okay. But if you're playing Mecha Engine or Gear Grinder, if you live in a more sparsely populated region like Australia, South America, or Southeast Asia, if you work a night shift and want to play during the off hours, you are fucked. The game coordinator is not only adjusting based on tours, required missions, and in-progress queuing, but is now also adjusting for self-imposed ping limitations and, potentially, stricter regional adjacency, and the sheer level of fragmentation imposed on the matchmaker is too much for it to handle outside of 2 cities. This hits the absolute hardest in the early AMs in Universal Time, i.e. when the Americans are asleep, the Europeans are at work, and Oceania is off the clock. Cross-regional play is now much more difficult to come by, which isn't a problem under conditions where it's not a necessity for group formation, but is absolutely unbearable under conditions where it is. The worst part about this is that it's a self-perpetuating problem. Why would anyone want to queue for Mecha Engine or Gear Grinder if it means waiting around for 20 minutes? They wouldn't, and so more and more players are running towards 2 cities for salvation, further straining the player pool for the other tours, increasing their queue times even more. And that's just on the man-up side of things. Bootcamp has arguably had an even rougher go of it recently. As it turns out, further segmenting an already very small player base into a game mode that has over 24 queuable missions doesn't do much for the welfare of the game. I can't confirm this one of my own accord, I'd rather deep throat the Ullapul Caber than spend 8 minutes waiting for Timmy Tutor to hit his F4 button, but according to outside testimony, it appears the problems have been transferred over. Also, speaking of boot camp, did you guys know that Valve apparently removed the functionality of letting you queue into vanilla MvM community servers? Yeah, that was a thing. Boot camp, even in 2024, was still operating off of the pre-Meet Your Match infrastructure that allowed you to get put into community servers. And just like the ping filter, Valve got rid of it without a single clarifying patch note. Granted, this was reliant on adjusting a convar to be eligible for the queue pool to begin with, which hosters in 2025 weren't necessarily following, but the functionality is no longer permissible and the modern server browser proves as much. Valve heard bring back quick play and responded by secretly deleting the last remaining remnant of quick play within the game. Have fun with that one. To give credit where it's due, the problem Valve was trying to solve here absolutely did exist. You would get the occasional servers that had incredibly high latency, when, just by waiting a little bit longer, you could find something much more local to you. I can't speak for everybody, but personally, I'd be down to wait an extra minute or two if it means guaranteeing a better play session. But not 10, not 15, not 20. I think that's a bit excessive. And if you disagree with me, cool. That's why there absolutely should be a ping filter. It allows people to curate their settings to their own liking, accepting the trade-offs at their own discretion. This kind of forced regional cohesion, however, is the very antithesis of curation, and multiple sectors of the MvM community have suffered needlessly because of it. I know I've been on kind of a negativity streak recently, and I do apologize if it's been tiring, but there's no better nor more likely time period in TF2's history to see these issues ironed out than during the upcoming MvM update. I've been machine gunning out all of my hypercritical videos back to back to back to back for this reason. We're in the home stretch of what could be the crown jewel of the post-Jungle Inferno TF2 era. So believe me when I say, Valve, this is the big one. Novelty, spectacle, relieving a decades-long content drought, all of these are things that can carry an update in the short term. But what happens to players coming home after a night shift, wondering why they're unable to find a game? What happens when people want to try out the older content, but the cross-regional player activity doesn't exist in large enough quantities to stimulate it? What happens when you have to cut off your Aussie friend from your party because his kangaroo Wi-Fi fucks the lobby for everyone? These problems aren't just harmful, but so unbelievably unnecessary. None of this was happening before November 2024. Nowhere near to the same extent, at least. And that's all short-term talk. While the MvM update will bolster the game mode's player base, who's to say the additional queue fractionalization caused by the new content will not only invalidate that extra player liquidity, but segregate the player base further and further and further to the point where we're worse off than we are right now. This isn't even a fearful speculation. This is literally happening as we speak. You could even argue community campaigns have contributed to this. At the end of the day, I'm not a game designer. I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers on how to solve these negative externalities. I am, however, an 840 tour MvM player with a working set of eyes who's been able to easily contrast how things were 2 years ago compared to right now. Outside of the bog standard evening 2 cities grind, the experience has become markedly worse for everything else. And come the MvM update, it's very likely 2 cities will follow in the same tracks. If you don't care now, you will care then. I'm making this video in the hopes that someone, anyone from Valve working on the MvM update, will see these issues and take action before launch day. I would argue it is vital for the game mode's health long term. And please, whatever you do, put them in the patch notes next time. Anyways, that wraps up my 2025. I'll see you all next year with a higher density of more upbeat content and a couple of very special announcements. Thank you all for watching the video. Twitter, Discord, second channel, and Twitch are all in the description. And that's all I got. See ya.